Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS, and today I'm going to give you my review for my Bridge to Halloween series of videos on the film Brain Damage. And this film came out in 1988 and it was written and directed by Henilotter, and he's an American filmmaker. Most people will know him for films like Basket Case 1 and 2 and 3, and he's also done a couple of documentaries as well, but he's mostly well known for making films that are kind of have a little bit of an attitude. He often described his films as exploitation films, and exploitation films are kind of on a different league in comparison to most horror films or most thrillers or most science fiction films, because they deal predominantly with more attitude and more bite in comparison to most films. And Henilotter, in his own right, could very easily make up an entire video of mine, because there's so much history about him and what he does. And he's a film historian. He also used to teach a lot of classical literary studies in a lot of universities. He taught in film schools and things like that, so he is a very skilled teacher of various storytelling techniques and filmmaking techniques. He's along the same lines as a filmmaker, along the lines of someone like the late great Wes Craven, who also was an academic and a huge study or a huge student of psychology and human behaviour, and that often integrated itself into a lot of his filmography as well. So there's a lot of interesting parallels there. But the film that I'm going to talk about is slightly a little bit more goofier than what I usually do. This film essentially came out in 1988, and it tells the story of a young man by the name of Brian, who one day when he's asleep in his bed, he ends up waking up from a very bizarre dream, only to find that a strange parasite by the name of Aylmer, Aylmer, has latched itself onto his back, and he is now effectively shooting him up with this purple juice that helps him to feel euphoric and happy and quaint, and it washes all his cares away. But in exchange for this, he feels extreme euphoria, but when he touches things, he can actually hear the sound of its colour, as he likes to call it. So there's all these different interesting things that this particular new substance that Aylmer has injected him with does. But also, he also has extreme euphoria, and he doesn't know when to stop or how to stop it effectively, so he becomes slightly addicted to it. And what Aylmer does effectively is he says, well, I can give you this substance of mine in exchange for one thing. You have to give me human brains. And that to me is one of the moments where I found myself going, okay, this is going to be dark. And I found myself kind of going, I actually really do. And I know I'm probably going to be slightly, alone on this, but I actually really do like this film. It was a lot of fun. It was a really kind of dark subject matter, but it was able to really kind of exercise its more goofier elements with a more serious subject underlining it. And what the biggest subject that this film tackles really does is it's essentially a film about drug addiction and how effectively what happens to your life when you become addicted to an illicit substance or to alcohol or any other kind of substance of any nature. It shows how soul destroying and how incredibly isolating it can be. But it also shows you just how incredibly insane the whole entire process is. Like, lots of people would look at Aylmer and think, I don't want any more of that juice in my body. But for the most part, he does want it because he enjoys the euphoria. He enjoys that sensation of feeling such incredible euphoria that he wants to do anything to get it effectively. And what's very interesting is I mentioned at the start of this video that Mr. Henilotter was a student of classical storytelling and mythic storytelling. One of the most famous stories ever written is the tale of Faust. And Faust is effectively the story about a man who is obsessed with power, he's obsessed with wealth, he's obsessed with all the things that he wants, all the greed, all the success in the world. And the devil comes to him and says, well, I can give you these things in exchange for you can have a whole 10 or 20 years of these wonderful things. You get to live the high life, but after those 10 or 20 years, you have to pay up and give me your soul. And that's effectively what's happening to Brian in this film. He's effectively making a deal with this very unknown, slightly phallic-shaped alien creature by the name of Aylmer, who is trying to effectively control him by using the substance, this blue substance he's become addicted to. And what I really like about this film is basically it doesn't necessarily play out in a very traditional horror film way, because it does play out as, because you're following Brian for a good majority of the time, you are following a lot of what's going on in his life, but you're also following him basically just enjoying life, enjoying this substance effectively. Like, there's this one scene where he goes to a nightclub and he's like going down to this very grungy, very kind of, stereotypically 80s, nightclub where it's very grungy with a lot of bikers and a lot of punks, and he's like sitting there in his suit and tie and he's like going, woo, this music's amazing, and he's acting very very euphoric, and he's clearly high as a kite, but everyone's like kind of looking at him, and you've got these very big bearded, bikers looking at him as if to say, what the hell is this guy doing? And it's just really hilarious, and it just really kind of goes to show what sort of a film this is. It's a sort of film that feels like it's made by people who just really love to make really good films, and you really can tell with Frank Henilotter, he is thinking about stuff while he's making it. He's not just simply making a gory, shocking, grotesque horror film. He's making a film about, drug addiction and what that does to people. But he's not necessarily wagging the finger at Brian either. He's not necessarily saying shame on you either. He's kind of showing... He's kind of doing what Irvin Welsh did with the novel Trainspotting, where he is kind of basically showing the negative sides of drug addiction, but he's also showing how people become addicted to substances and the fascination and all these other things. And that's what Frank Henilotter is trying to do with Aylmer. But what I really like about this film, and this is one of those things that I really do like, is the deaths are really graphic. And what I really like about this film in regards to the deaths, I'm not going to say how people die or what actually happens, but the deaths are really gory and really grotesque, and you really do find yourself kind of going, oh no, this is still quite horrible. What they do very well is they really do balance the comedy very well, because what's really interesting is because Brian's high as a kite on this blue substance, he finds himself almost looking at things almost like in a very childlike way, almost like he's looking at something for the very first time. Like how, a cat would look at a light, like a beam of light on the ground. It's almost like very almost innocent and very childlike almost. And then you're kind of watching him reacting to something, but he's reacting to it with almost like this very childlike wonder. And then you've got this very horrible sequence where you've got this guy like having his brain sucked out by Aylmer, and the guy's screaming his head off in a really painful horror film-like way. But then you've also got Brian like sitting there with his tongue out, like watching this really horrific scene. But he's looking at the colours. He's looking at the colours of what this beautiful, this really kind of almost Dario Argento-esque, lighting, where it's like, you're seeing this very horrible sequence, but it's done through this very comedic fashion. And it's very hilarious. It has a great sense of humour. And I also like the fact that this film has a great deal of really kind of guerrilla style filmmaking, which is that you feel like when you are watching this film, you're not watching the film thinking that, oh yeah, this is clearly, a street that's been blocked off. When you're watching the film in real time, when Brian is walking down the street and he's going to that hotel, I think it's called the Sunshine Hotel, sorry, a bit of a mouthful there, but it's called the Sunshine Hotel, and when he goes into it, he's not necessarily going into a set, he's going into the actual hotel. So when you're kind of watching the film, you're kind of watching it knowing that there's a reason why the editing is so choppy, where it cuts from scene to transition, it would do like that backwards swipe thing. It does it because it's basically saying that we had to edit around this because we had to only film like an hour or 30 minutes at a time per day. And they had to literally make the apartment scene, the big scene where he goes through withdrawals. They had to do it all on a soundstage because they could only film for about, 30 minutes a day in the actual hotel. So that's why a lot of the scenes in the hotel are rather choppily edited. And it does make me kind of think, oh yeah, this does feel kind of, a little bit rushed in some cases. But then you realise that, oh yeah, that's the reason why, because they were pretty much filming on a set budget, and they had to basically film within this New York apartment complex in a very short period of time, and then very quickly move on. And that guerrilla style of filmmaking kind of shows in the acting as well, because the acting in this film ranges from being very kind of decent to being kind of bad. The big one, and I'm sorry to pick on actors, but the big one who I kind of saw had really bad acting or really kind of bad, dialogue or line reads was the girlfriend. I think Brian's girlfriend was one of the ones where I found myself going, I wish they'd done that line again. And there's this one line that she says at the very start where she goes, do you want to go to the concert with me tonight? And that one word that's meant to be in between the and concert, it's meant to be like the band name, but you can't for the life, I can't for the life of me make out what that was, and I kept thinking to myself, what was that? And even other YouTubers like Brandon Tenold, he famously made a joke out of that entire sequence where it's like, what the hell is she saying in that moment, because you can't understand what she's saying. And I thought, do that line again. You have to. I literally switched on the subtitles, and I thought, clearly you must know what this thing is that they're going to. But she never does. They never do say. It just sort of says speaks inaudibly, and it's like, well, that's helpful. And it's one of those strange moments. But I just really love this film. I love the fact that it's so off the walls, bonkers. It's the sort of film that I would have made as a teenager. It feels like the sort of film that if I had enough vision and enough drive and enough energy, because I am quite lazy at the best of times, I think I would have made a film like this. I feel like this film would have been sort of my movie to make, about drug addiction if I could, because it just seems so off the wall and bonkers, but then at the same time it feels so me at the same time. But then except it wouldn't have been in New York, it probably would have been in Croydon or in Cambridge, where I'm living now. So it kind of feels like that's what it would have been. It would have been people with Cambridgeshire accents, or country accents, talking like, what the hell is going on here then? Or something like that. But it's really great, and I really do like the fact that with the character of Aylmer, played by John Zachary, he's a very famous, well-known character actor in America. But in this is probably my first ever role I've heard him in, or heard his voice. And he has this very wonderful voice as Aylmer, because he's both... Because if you look at Aylmer, it's effectively a very goofy-looking, sock-like alien figure. But it's got these very cartoonish eyes, these very small cartoonish eyes, and this very kind of fake mouth that's being puppeted. But it also has this element of being both really kind of goofy looking, but if you compare that to John Zachary's voice, which is very kind of wholesome and very old man kind of ish sounding, or very wise and very truthful, and then you have this very kind of weird thing that Aylmer does where he likes to suck out people's brains. It's so bizarre, and he's saying things like, when Brian finds out that he's essentially got blood on his trousers, he gets out of his clothes and he puts them in the trash can, and he says to Aylmer several years later, I don't know where the blood came from, what happened? And Aylmer goes, the blood came from the person whose brains I sucked out. And it's done in such a matter-of-fact way that it's kind of... And he does it in almost like a very light and very calm way. And it's coming out of this very goofy-looking puppet, like this very cartoonish puppet. And you're kind of shocked a little bit, because you're kind of thinking, how can such an almost adorable-looking puppet have this very kind of sinister kind of words coming out of his mouth? And it really is bizarre, but it's brilliant. And it's one of those films where if I hadn't seen any other Frank Henilotter films and someone had given this to me and said, hey, give this a watch, I would have been more fascinated to check out his work. And I feel like because this is my first Frank Henilotter film, I want to check out more of his films now. I want to check out more of his filmography, his more darker storytelling and darker techniques. And I also want to just see more of his crazy filmmaking skills, because this film felt like a revelation. It felt like the first time I saw Death Note. It felt like there was an incredible sense of... There was just this wonderful, sense of something happening, a love or an admiration happening there. And I really do think that's a fantastic thing. And I like the fact that they essentially take this very strange character by the name of Aylmer, and they essentially turn him into a surrogate for the devil. He's effectively the devil in this story. He's the one who's saying, I can give you this blue juice, but in return you have to give me brains. And that's effectively all it is. Excuse me. And if you pay attention to the to the documentary called Listen to the Light, which is available on YouTube. It's called Listen to the Light, The Making of Brain Damage 2017. And in that particular documentary, they also say that the film was inspired by the tale of Faust, and how they wanted to basically create a Faustian tale, but make it more about a metaphor for drug addiction and the withdrawals people would go through, especially in the rundown Sunshine Apartment sequence, where he literally is going through withdrawal, he's vomiting, and Aylmer's in the sink, like, singing to himself, and he goes, "You can't resist forever, Brian. I can give you everything you want. You just have to submit to me," and things like that. And he's like singing the song. He's like being very, very annoying, but then at the same time he knows he's kind of pushing Brian's buttons, and Brian's just sitting there like going, "Oh no, stop!" and he's like crying, and it's very horrific. But at the same time, when you have that very serious sequence of Brian going through withdrawals, but then you have that moment where it's like you're having Aylmer sing in the sink a lot, like as he's going through withdrawals, like he's vomiting, he's possibly shitting himself and peeing himself and other things. It's really quite horrific to watch. And then you've got him like singing in the sink, like doing he's like a little puppet, like going, "This is Aylmer's tune." It's very grim, but it manages to really kind of walk this very fine line of being both really disturbing, but then also being rather funny, and it manages to kind of re-walk that tightrope. And there's this really wonderful sequence. I don't want to say too much about what happens in this film, because honestly, if you're curious, I'd recommend watching it for yourself. But there's this really wonderful sequence where he's in the apartment, he's going through withdrawals, and he feels something on the side of his head, and he plucks it out of his ear, and he like goes, "Oh, what's this?" And it's like a weird slug wiry thing. He plucks it out, and then immediately his entire head just starts to sprout this fountain of blood. And it's one of those things where it's like, it's bloody impressive. And if you see in the documentary and Listen to the Light on YouTube, The Making of Brain Damage, it will tell you that they basically got a container and they filled it with all sorts of craft service table stuff, like fake blood and everything like that, and all they got from craft services, and they tilted it upwards, and they tilted the actor who played Brian on his side, Rick Hurst I think his name is, and they tilted him on his side, and even him I'm actually quite surprised at, because when this film, and they basically tilted him over and they put him in this like, they put this like styrofoam case over where he would be sitting, and they basically just pour the contents of this, mixture, this fake blood and meat and, all the stuff from craft services table down the chute and out, and they would basically just film a shot of him like standing upright or tilting him slightly, and they would just put the two images together, and he would just have to react in post like he's just seeing a fountain of blood. And it's such an incredible moment, because it's like two great big effects moments happen there, and they're just meshed together. The power of editing, eh? But it's really wonderful. It's a really fantastic gory film to watch. It's not necessarily a film I'd watch on Halloween, but I would most definitely say that it is definitely one to watch. It definitely is an experience for a person who loves, grotesque, very dark stories about life, love and addiction. And there's all sorts of other crazy things that happen in this film, but I'm not going to say what it is, because you have to find out what it is. There's an entire sequence on a train which follows a character from one of Frank Henilotter's other films, which I won't spoil just in case you don't see it. But in one of those cases, it's an amazing film. There's so many great sequences in this, and I just thought Frank Henilotter is a genius, and I think the fact that he was able to make this film alone, let alone Basket Case, really goes to show that he was one of those filmmakers to watch back then. So if you've seen this film, good God, if you have seen this film, let me know what you thought of it down in the comments, and let me know what else, other films you'd like me to talk about later on in the future. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I've got other films coming up later on today, other film reviews coming up. I wanted to do some Bridge to Halloween stuff before Halloween was out, because I do love talking about stuff, horror films, especially around this time of year. But I hope you're having a very good day. This has been Josh with WHIMS. I hope you're all doing very well. Take care, bye for now. And if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, please subscribe for more, and leave a comment on how you thought of this film, or what other films you'd like me to talk about in the future. Let me know what you think. This has been Josh with WHIMS. Take care, bye for now.